Sure, I'll be happy to introduce the second speaker. The second speaker is Dr. Simão Serrano, and he'll be talking about injecting the limbs. He's also from Portugal, a very young, an outstanding physiatrist. Yeah, so we have in the sequence, injecting the limb, injecting the spine by Dr. Otsukega, and then the last will be injecting the pelvis, but this one is injecting the limbs by Dr. Simão Serrano. Welcome, Dr. Serrano.
Thank you very much. I would like to send my regards to everyone, to moderators and all my colleagues. Actually, I'm presenting this theme, injecting the limbs in Pandemics 2020. But first of all, I would like to, let me just put my pointer. First of all, I would like to recall you that precisely when 1 year ago, we were doing Aeromusculus 10, and I thank you, Professor Levent Orskakar, for the privilege that was to organize such a course. It was a huge success. And I also thank my colleagues, João Constantino and Jorge Barbosa, that helped me also to organize such a good course. And thank you very much also for this opportunity to be here in Pandemics. So let's start this presentation with the real clinical cases so that we can see the real application of the evidence in the literature, and prepare because it will be a fast motion journey, and you'll see that soon. So regarding the proximal upper limb, I bring you a case of a 52 years old man that had in the cervical region a big nodule that was thought to be a lymph node. But after surgery, the surgeons came to realize that was a schwannoma. But after the removal of the schwannoma, the patient started with allodynia in this supraclavicular, pectoral, inframandibular, and earlobe areas. This was limiting him functionally and also in his quality of life. And when you know this pattern, you know that the superficial cervical plexus was involved here. So what we tried to do was to do a block of the small branches of this superficial cervical plexus, as you can see, until we reach here the ACM muscle. And by this procedure, we tried to assess several of these small branches of the cervical plexus. Actually, after 3 blocks, there was a greatly reduction of the allodynic area, as you can see. And actually, now we are considering about using a steam router device, so the patient himself can control the pain at home on a more long-lasting term. Another case, many of us doing rehabilitation, we treat patients with cancer, and you know that recently more drugs were added for the treatment regimens. Some of them are the anti-PD-1 and anti-PD-L1 treatments, these biological drugs. And I bring you a case of a 61 years old man with stage 4 lung cancer that was under treatment with pembrolizumab. That is an anti-PD-1 drug for 3 months. And we know that up to 70% of these patients will have the so-called rheumatic adverse events. And in this case, you can see by this panoramic image, a very large bursa, the subdeltoid bursa, with a very thick content and with these hyperechoic areas. After 3 months of treatment with this drug, it started to develop this clinical setting of stiffness of both shoulders and inflammatory pain. And afterwards, we performed the clinical examination and the ultrasound examination, as you can see. Actually, this was a huge bursitis, a bilateral one. As you can see here, the bursa was very large and going till the lateral part of the shoulder. And actually, with the image like this, so exuberant, we asked for an MRI to be sure that this was not a secondary lesion. Actually, ultrasound also helped us to use a 14G needle to do a lavage and try to aspirate some of the fluid. And actually, no neoplastic cells were found in the fluid. So we assumed this was a checkpoint inhibitors related bursitis that is also known in the literature. And actually, after this, we opt to start medication with prednisolone, and this was enough to treat the symptoms, and it was not needed the patient to stop the main cancer therapy. When you have shoulder osteoarthritis, you can try different approaches. One of them is denervation techniques, and you can both approach the suprascapular or the axillary nerve, but now I will focus on the proximal approach to the suprascapular nerve. Why? Because if you know the articles from Peng and his colleagues, they have studied the innervation of joints, and they have realized that if you do the block on the distal approach, you will miss these green branches that go to the subacromial joint, and also these blue branches that go to the AC joint. So if you try to do the proximal block, as you can see, you have to start on the cervical area. You check for the scalene muscles, the anterior medium muscle, and you see the brachial plexus, and then you'll see the nerve detaching from the brachial plexus, and it will run behind or beneath the homohyoid muscle. Then you will be able to do a block, as I'm doing here, from the posterior to anterior. The brachial plexus is away from it, and you can do the hydrodissection, or you can use any denervation techniques, radiofrequency, or cryoneurolysis. It's something you should consider. Frozen shoulder, there is no doubt that ultrasound is paramount to help us to do these procedures. You can easily control the injection. You can see the capsule enlarging. You are in control. And most of all, and most importantly, the patient will see the benefits of such interventions just after a mobilization, after doing a procedure like this that has accumulated evidence. The same applies with barbotage. It's also nice to remove and also to approach the bursa and relieve the pain of a subacromial conflict. And here you can see the difference, 2 months difference between pre-intervention and 2 months after. You can see perfectly the difference in the X-ray. So, regarding tennis elbow, some patients are wrongly diagnosed with this condition. We know that there is the so-called pseudolateral epicondylitis that is not, basically it's a posterior interosseous nerve neuropathy. And this patient, he was about 30 years old. He has a job that is requires a lot of strength from his arm. And actually, his symptoms were worsening with physiotherapy and with deep transverse friction massage. His symptoms on the lateral epicondyle was getting worse. So the thing is, he also refers some referred pain to the dorsal distal wrist at the level of the interosseous membrane. And when you do a nerve ultrasound, we realize this is the radial nerve, that when it enters the supinator, it gets swollen. As you can see, I'm going back and forth. You can see what's happening here. And if you do see the patient doing this exercise, you can see this muscle that is enlarging a lot here also in the image, and also in the ultrasound image, that is extensor carpi radialis brevis. And this muscle was introducing some impingement in the nerve. And here on the lung axis, you can see the enlargement of the pin nerve just proximally to when it's entering to the supinator muscle. This is a long axis at the level of the Frosch arcade. So what did we try was to do hydrodissection of the nerve, but obviously the result was not good, because there was a mechanical problem here. So now we are considering about or to change the work environment or the work type, or eventually, according to some orthopedic surgeons, one of the options would be to do the tenotomy of this muscle, the extensor carpi radialis brevis muscle. So it's good to keep in mind different options. Another case of a 55-year-old lady with this acute monoarthritis of the elbow. You can see the effusion here between the humerus and the radial bone, the effusion. But when you continue to do the examination of the elbow, you see this image here on the right. So this is a calcification within the cartilage, and this is very typical from chondrocalcinosis. Because of that, we went to see other joints. For instance, here we see a calcification of the fibrocartilage complex on the wrist, and also on the knee, you can see the calcification of the trochlear cartilage. So with this information, we came to have this high suspicion of chondrocalcinosis. Obviously, it was only symptomatic in the elbow. But with ultrasound, we could easily aspirate the fluid from the elbow joint, from the posterior approach, and to take this liquid fluid to really confirm the calcium deposits on the fluid and to do the diagnosis. So keep in mind that we can also help the patient to have a good diagnosis. For CTS, we know that this is a long axis in the carpal tunnel. You know that the nerve enlarges proximally to the carpal tunnel, as you can see here. This can be seen both long axis and in the transverse scan. You can see here on the transverse scan how the cross-sectional area is increasing just proximally to the carpal tunnel. And you can do several, you have different treatment options, but one of them, as you can see here, is the hydrodissection, and there is loads of evidence. So here is an example of what you can do with the standoff technique. You can enter the carpal tunnel, and then slowly, with the proper needle, you will do the hydrodissection of the nerve, really being sure that you are separating the nerve from the transverse carpal ligament, and then beneath the nerve, you want to be sure that you are doing a good desiolysis. The thing is that right now we know that you don't need even use steroids. You can use, for instance, dextrose 5%, and it will be effective according to latest data. And this effect can go and last up to 2 years, according to recent studies. Going to the proximal limb, this is an example of a medical student that she went to the surgery because of a femoral acetabular impingement, and she had some complications after the surgery. She had a frozen hip. She needed to be on surgery again, and even to do injections on the joint. But the thing is, she continued to have severe pain. And for a medical student, not being able to be sitting more than 10 minutes, it's quite a challenge. So we discussed with her and proposed the possibility of doing a Peng block. According to Peng, also he studied this joint. Loads of, as you can see this in this diagram, loads of articular branches for the joint are coming beneath the psoas muscle here at this level. So what you can do is to put a probe on the joint, on the transverse scan, and then go a little bit proximally until you see this image. And here you see the anterior inferior iliac spine, the psoas muscle, and the tendon that right now is not hyperechoic. And here the bundle, the neurovascular bundle. And by this, you can approach with the needle this interface between the cortical bone and the muscle, and you like to hydrodissect this area with the fluid, and of course with steroid or dextrose 5%, or even a local anesthetic. And the thing is that in the follow-up 2 weeks later, she really felt pain relief, and now she can stand and she can sit for longer than 1 hour. So it was a good result, and obviously we think about repeating such a procedure. When not to inject. So this was a patient that I was following from the palliative care, that is 45 years old with colon cancer, but only with known hepatic metastasis. And he started to with this inflammatory pain on his left iliac crest on the posterior side. And after putting the probe, and with high suspicion rate, we put the probe and we are immediately suspicious and worried. He had some bone erosions, and you can see here the power Doppler intensity. So because of that, I ordered a CT scan, an urgent CT scan, and obviously he had an osteoblastic lesion here on the iliac bone. So do not inject. What about knee? I bring you a case of a 52-year-old lady. You can see these knees, obviously with indication, a formal indication for total knee arthroplasty. But the thing is that she had allergy to all metal components. This was confirmed by epicutaneous skin tests. So we discussed with her the possibility of doing a prognostic nerve block. So we thought about the block of the genicular nerves and also include the infrapatellar branch of the saphenous nerve. And if effective, maybe try another technique like cryoneurolysis that also has some evidence for knee. And actually, because of these cadaveric studies, we know very well the different nerves responsible for the innervation of the knee capsule. So one of them is the superior medial genicular nerve. How can you go to the nerve? You see the nerve is here on this valley on the medial side. You can really locate the artery that is accompanying the nerve, the superior medial genicular nerve. And with these new machines, you can even see on the long axis the artery so very well portrayed here in this image. And you can assess the nerve because the nerve is really close to the artery. So we can perform the block here and do the block of the superior medial genicular nerve, and then do the inferior medial genicular nerve that normally runs beneath the medial collateral ligament and the pars serenus. You can do both long axis and short axis, or sorry, in plane and out of plane. Sometimes out of plane is better in thin knees. And also the superior lateral genicular nerve block, as you can see on the lateral side. I bring your attention to this nerve that is the infrapatellar branch of the saphenous nerve. That it's not only the nerve that it innervates, but also it gives branches to the medial joint. So here we're seeing the infrapatellar branch of the saphenous nerve. He's here on a subcutaneous tissue just above the medial compartment at the medial meniscus, and let's try to follow it. We'll try to go with it a little bit proximally. Here, a little bit proximally, so we can do a more proximal block. And here is the nerve, and then we can assess it and do the block. It's something to consider because the evidence, the literature, really recommend you to also address this branch. Next, you can use cryoneurolysis, where you use this ball of ice to provoke a lesion of the nerve and to do a lesion on the axons. Even though you know that you are doing a grade 2 lesion according to Sunderland, so you have an impact endoneurium, so there is less risk of neuroma formation. And here is the ultrasound image. When you use this technology, you can see the ball of ice, and then it will make the cortical bone disappear. And after you defroze, some minutes after, you see the cortical a good option for us to treat these patients like radiofrequency. I bring you two cases of sudden non-traumatic drop foot. The first case is a 40-year-old man with progressive drop foot. And actually, when we went to the clinical examination and to do the ultrasound examination, you see here the bifurcation of the sciatic. And here next to the fibular nerve, you see the cyst that was always accompanying the nerve until the superior tibiofibular joint. And here in long axis, you can see also the cyst accompanying the nerve. So this is the so-called fibular cyst that is an intraneural cyst, and I tried to aspirate without success, and so the surgery was needed, and you can easily see here the cyst accompanying the nerve all the way until the superior tibiofibular joint. Another case is a 49-year-old man with a sudden drop foot, but in this case, you can see in long axis the fibular nerve passing above the fibular head, and you can see that is extrinsically being compressed by a cyst that is extraneural cyst is coming from the superior tibiofibular joint. And in this case, I tried to aspirate and do a fenestration of the capsule of the cyst, and actually no further surgery was needed. Nevertheless, keep in mind that some of these cysts can have a high rate of recurrence, but we accept with the orthopedic team to accept this result, and the patient is informed about this. The relevance of ultrasound in sports medicine, because we also see sports patients. This is a case of an 18-year-old boy with an ankle sprain that went to the emergency room, and the RICE protocol was applied. But the thing is, some 3-4 days after, he started to develop the progressive dropped foot. And when he went to my consultation and I saw this clinical scenario, I was worried, and there was some swelling on the proximal part of the leg. When I put a probe on the proximal part of the leg, I see a big hematoma, an intramuscular hematoma of the fibularis longus muscle, as you can see here, also in the transverse scan. So immediately I aspirate 12 cc's of hepatic fluid, and actually, because of being 3-4 days compressed, only 1 year after it was possible to have a full recovery of this situation. Now I'm showing you a case of a sural nerve injury after ruptured Achilles tendon surgery. This was because the surgeon used the lateral approach instead of the medial approach, and you'll see that there was an injury on the sural nerve that goes really close to the Achilles tendon, and here you can see the swelling and the thickening of the nerve. Here you can see also the surgical incision. Then the nerve after this gets a normal structure, and if you go back again, you want to really be sure that in the long axis there is any kind of complete or partial lesion. So you turn your probe 90 degrees and you try to see the long axis, and you'll see the lesion here. So it was considered a partial injury of the sural nerve. What was the problem here is that the patient had this severe pain on the lateral part of the foot, and actually couldn't wear shoes to return to work because he was very good regarding the rest of the goals of the rehabilitation program. So he went to do the block of this sural nerve at the level that he was enlarged, and actually it was effective. He returned to work. We use no cortisone here, no steroids, only ropivacaine and dextrose 5%. And this was enough to solve the issue, and he returned to work because he could wear shoes. This is a very interesting case of a 26-year-old lady with a situation of ankle joint swelling and pain, and it started to develop on the postpartum period, and it was getting worse. The only thing she had, it was this image, this reddish color of the foot, but no increase of temperature, no other inflammatory signs. So she was referred, because there was no history of trauma, she was referred to our pain unit with a suspicion of a CPRES. But the thing is, she didn't add the requirements to do this diagnosis, and the fluid was there in the joint. So we went to do an aspiration of the fluid in the tibio-talar joint. That was the problem, as you can see here, and we were very suspicious about the fluid present during the ultrasound examination. And here you can see we are approaching with the standoff technique this joint. Unfortunately for her, the fluid was very suggestive of septic arthritis. Because of this, we went to ask for an emergent arthroscopic joint lavage, and it was devastating. The cartilage, the hyaline cartilage, was destroyed. The joint was destroyed. So because of fluid and blood analysis, we came to this conclusion that she had ankle tuberculosis in the postpartum period. So she had a pulmonary involvement and also extrapulmonary tuberculosis, a devastating case. I want you to show a very nice technique. So this was a patient in her 30s. She had heel pain. Everyone was suspecting for a plantar fascia problem, but she was not getting better. And with MRI, you can see that the problem was in the sheath of the flexor hallux longus tendon, as you can see here. So it's interestingly that with ultrasound examination, in order to see the fluid, I had to squeeze the plantar area on the flexor hallux longus region, on the plantar area, so I could get the fluid. As you can see in the video, I could see the fluid showing up on the tarsal tunnel, as you can see here. So this is the tibial nerve. So how to approach the sheath? I have to do this approach from lateral to medial, beneath the Achilles tendon here, through the Kager's fat pad, and reach the sheath here. Why? Because the tibial nerve is here, so it's difficult to have this kind of approach. So you can do this safely approach beneath the Achilles. It's an interesting technique. And to show you two more cases, this is a 55-year-old lady, an infant teacher that was not obese, and as you can see, she had this mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy that was not getting better with physiotherapy. So I discussed with her the possibility of doing a hydrodissection because of the accumulated literature evidence. So we tried to do, as you can see, there is a big enlargement of the medial part of the mid part of the tendon, as you can see on the transverse plane here. So what we do is to do a hydrodissection of this interface between the tendon and the Kager's fat pad, because we know that loads of
sorry, Dr. Simao,
yes.
Could you, the time?
Yeah, please? I'm finishing.
Yes, yes.
And the last one is a 48-year-old lady that went to several injections on the plantar fascia, but as you can see here, the problem is a fat pad atrophy, not a problem in the fascia, plantar fascia, but the fat pad atrophy. So we will not inject this patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serrano.